Information discussed in this podcast may be sensitive in nature to some listeners. Listener discretion is advised. Curtis Crosby was the man everyone knew and loved. You couldn't miss him either. Curtis had a big smile, a huge smile, the type of smile that showed on his entire face. Curtis did have some rough times, however, yet he never stopped smiling. In 2005, Curtis, then living in Louisiana, was displaced and separated from his family after Hurricane Katrina devastated that region of the United States. For 1 year, he was separated from his adult children. No one knew where anyone was. Cell phones were lost or damaged, and phone numbers were misplaced. It was 2006 when Curtis finally tracked down a family member and called them to let them know he had survived, he was okay, and he was living in Salt Lake City, Utah. Around Thanksgiving in 2014, authorities were called to a vacant building for some trespassing in Salt Lake City. Turns out it had been Curtis camping out in there. He was asked to leave, he was escorted home, and it left everybody confused. This didn't make any sense. Curtis had an apartment just 5 blocks down the road. That Christmas, his family grew very concerned when they couldn't reach Curtis and he hadn't contacted them. He had always stayed in touch with family despite living all the way in Utah now. It was then that they decided they had to officially report Curtis as missing. Clues were few and far between as to where Curtis might have disappeared to. His daughter even flew to Salt Lake City to help in the physical searches for her father. But they never found him. Curtis Crosby had disappeared. Hello, and welcome back to the Where Are They podcast, a bonus episode and another unsolved missing persons story. This story takes us to Salt Lake City, Utah, and tells the tragic story of a 59-year-old man who had already been through so much in life. Most everyone in the United States, at least, remembers Hurricane Katrina. Katrina made landfall near New Orleans, Louisiana on August 29th, 2005. The damage was devastating. The death toll was even worse. Over 1,800 fatalities were eventually confirmed as a result of Katrina. The area also suffered billions of dollars in damage, and even now, in 2025, there are still signs of the hurricane in southern Louisiana. The infrastructure and the economy was impacted so badly, there are places where they are still rebuilding. The storm caused flooding and storm surges that wreaked the most damage. Curtis Crosby was actually rescued that day via helicopter, and he was separated from everyone. Many of the evacuees were taken to different states. Somehow, Curtis ended up in Salt Lake City, Utah. When he was finally reunited with family a year later, he would tell them tales of how much he loved it there in Salt Lake City. It was so beautiful, he said, and the people had been wonderful to him. Curtis worked with the homeless population there and was very active with several community outreach programs. He focused on helping the evacuees from Hurricane Katrina, as well as helping the less fortunate. He quickly became a well-known community figure there in South Salt Lake, and everyone loved Curtis. No one ever had anything bad to say about this man who was devoting his life now to helping others. Despite now living several states away from most of his family, Curtis did keep in touch with them. If not regularly, at least occasionally. He never went too long with being out of touch. One of his daughters recalls calling her father in October of 2014. It was the anniversary of her mother's passing, and she wanted to talk to her father that day. It would bring her comfort. She just wanted to hear her dad's voice. This would also be the last day she would speak to him. That conversation was normal for the most part, but she does remember him being rushed. He was in a hurry for some reason, and the call was cut a little bit short. Sadly, she wouldn't speak to him again. Around Thanksgiving time, a landlord called law enforcement to report a man trespassing in one of his empty buildings. A man had set up a camp of sorts, and he was sleeping in this building. When law enforcement showed up, they found Curtis living or camping out in this abandoned building, even though they discovered he had an apartment just 5 blocks down the road. They escorted him back home. Now, there are a lot of unanswered questions revolving around this incident. Why was he sleeping in an empty building? What was his reasoning to the officers? What did he tell them? I'm sure they had to ask him, right? Especially when they learned that he lived especially when they learned that he lived right down the road. What have the officers had to say about this encounter with Curtis? As the weeks went by, no one in the family heard from Curtis. They tried to reach out to him occasionally with no luck. Their worry grew with each unanswered call, but they hoped that he was just busy with his outreach work and his volunteering. But something was starting to feel off. It would be Christmas that year when his family's concern escalated enough that they knew they had to call authorities and report Curtis as missing. Curtis might have been known to go out of touch for brief periods of time. Everybody in his family was an adult. They didn't have to speak every day or regularly, but he would absolutely never miss calling the family on Christmas Day. They were convinced that something was very wrong with Curtis. It was at this point, when they reported him missing, that they learned about that incident around Thanksgiving, and it didn't make any sense to them why Curtis would be living in that empty building. Curtis, as I said earlier, was loved by everyone. He was healthy. He was in good shape as far as anyone knew, and he had no physical or mental impairments, again, that anyone knew of. He had a perfectly good apartment. There was no reason for him to be living on the streets. Searches around the area also turned up no signs of Curtis. Law enforcement turned to the media to get his photo out there and asked the public for help. And tips would come in, as did possible sightings of Curtis. Some said they had seen him walking the streets around South Salt Lake. Others said he was living in a homeless encampment. All of the tips that came in were thoroughly checked out, but nothing led to Curtis. The sightings were determined to likely not be Curtis Crosby. Curtis's daughters flew to Salt Lake City to help search for their father. They had lost their mother 4 years earlier, and they didn't want to lose their father. They started hanging up flyers and talking to people around the neighborhood where Curtis had lived. From doing that, they would learn some very troubling news about their dad. A couple of the neighbors told them that in the weeks leading up to his disappearance, Curtis had been having some troubles. They had actually found him wandering the streets near his apartment, seemingly lost and unsure how to get back home. This happened a few times, and each time a neighbor would walk him back home and get him safely to his apartment. Of course, this was extremely troubling for his daughters. They had not known at all that Curtis was having these type of issues. Was this due to an illness, an injury, or was this the beginning of dementia? This might explain Curtis taking up camp in the abandoned building. Perhaps he couldn't remember where he lived or how to get there. Curtis at this time was 59 years old. The majority of dementia patients are over the age of 65, so Curtis was young for these type of symptoms. only 5% of dementia patients are under the age of 65, so the family really wasn't prepared for this kind of news. It seemed to come to them out of the blue. Plus, they hadn't detected any signs of this themselves, so the news was not just worrisome, of course, but shocking. Still, law enforcement and family uncovered no clues to lead them to Curtis's whereabouts now, and the tips and leads coming in weren't helpful either. With months and months going by without any sign of their father, his daughters decided it was time to hire a private investigator. They needed some help. Now, this investigator hit the ground running in Salt Lake City and soon announced that he believed Curtis was the victim of foul play. He also said that he thought Curtis was likely hiding out from someone when he was found in that empty building, not necessarily that he was lost, but that he was in hiding, and the officer escorting him home actually allowed the perpetrators that he was hiding from to now find Curtis. He allegedly found witnesses who said they saw Curtis being forced into a car by 5 men, and it appeared to them that he was being forced in against his will. But nothing else was learned about this, and if they did see that incident, they didn't report it to police at that time. But the investigator did put this information out there to the public in hopes of getting additional leads or witnesses to come forward. If this did happen, perhaps somebody saw something. But no additional information came in. Curtis Crosby has been missing now for 11 years. Authorities aren't sure if he is living somewhere, possibly living among the homeless, maybe even forgot where he lives or who he even is, or if maybe something bad did happen to him out there. The Utah Cold Case Coalition has put up a $3,000 reward for information on Curtis Crosby's disappearance. Curtis Crosby survived Hurricane Katrina, one of the worst natural disasters to hit the United States in recent history. He ended up going across the country, living in Salt Lake City, Utah, dedicating his life to helping other victims of Katrina and helping the less fortunate in and around his new city. Curtis also loved his family and certainly would have never wanted to worry them, especially his daughters. Salt Lake City, Utah does have the highest number of homeless people within the state of Utah itself. There are about 2,000 homeless people in the city, and that number does continue to grow slightly every year. And those numbers are likely low due to unreported homelessness as well. Could Curtis Crosby be among those living in the streets? Or did something sinister happen to Curtis, as the private investigator believes? What do you think happened to Curtis Crosby? Curtis is described as a black male, standing 5 foot 10 inches tall and weighing around 200 pounds when he was last seen in November of 2014. He was 59 years old with gray hair and brown eyes. His most notable feature was his big smile. It's also possible that he might have facial hair. Anyone with any information on the whereabouts of Curtis Crosby is asked to contact the South Salt Lake City Police Department at 801-412-3600. Thank you for listening to Curtis's story today. Another unsolved missing person case that has received little attention, but a case that could be solved with just that one tip or sighting that could lead to Curtis's whereabouts. A big thank you, of course, for supporting our show and our mission to keep sharing these stories with you. We couldn't keep going without your continued help and support. If you do have any feedback, case suggestions, or any case information, please reach out anytime. You can find us over on the socials, or you can send me an email at canwefindthem@gmail.com. We will be back again very soon with another unsolved missing persons story. And until then, stay safe and hug your loved ones.